Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Common Language, where we break down today's complex policy issues into easy to understand ideas, helping curious minds stay informed, empowered, and engaged.
Today, we are going to be talking about retirement policy, more specifically, the Social Security system, access to savings accounts, and what's going on with Trump's new messaging around this.
Yes, a very important topic because even though it may not feel super timely now, it's something we all need once we get older. And we have a kind of crumbling social security system at the moment, which we'll get into a little bit later. And I think this also touches on the kind of public versus private sector and who bears the responsibility of ensuring Americans have access to this. And we'll dig into Trump's policy solutions to help people with retirement security.
Amazing. So let's jump into our vocab for this episode. First one is retirement policies. And what are they? So, retirement policies in the US include employee sponsored plans such as 401k, 403b, and pensions, individual accounts such as IRAs, and Social Security. Key policies, issues, and debates related to our retirement system are on Social Security insolvency, including the mechanism to improve enrollment, access, income inadequacy, and contribution and age limits. So, those are retirement policies. And then let's get into Social Security. Social Security is the commonly used term for the Federal Old Age Survivors and Disability Insurance Program, or OASDI. And it's a federal insurance program that provides monetary benefits to retirees, disabled workers, and survivors of deceased workers, funded through mandatory payroll taxes. So essentially, Social Security acts as a safety net to prevent poverty by replacing a portion of a worker's pre retirement income. So these are the ways in which we set people up for retirement success, so they say. Let's discuss.
Yeah. Yes. So I think we're so accustomed to Social Security being this kind of anchor in our social safety net, but it started going back a little bit in the 1930s. So in 1935, FDR, as a part of the whole New Deal package, introduced the Social Security system through the Social Security Act. And it created this universal retirement system. So then basically what happened is we had Social Security, which is this universal like public program. But through employers, through the private sector, a lot of people had pensions. And this was another type of retirement account that workers used to ensure that they had enough money to live off of once they were no longer in the workforce. Then we saw a shift, and that was because in the late 70s, the government passed the Revenue Act of 1978. And this created Section 401k of the tax code. And this allowed workers to defer their salary into retirement accounts before taxes. And there's many different reasons why Congress passed this bill, setting up a different type of retirement savings vehicles, the 401k for workers, and it's had lots of impacts. And we'll talk about all of those today. But that's kind of the historical context as to why we have a social security system, a private retirement pension saving system, and then a private individual IRA kind of system and how they all work together. Currently, there is a little bit of a crisis because a lot of researchers and a lot of advocates are saying that by 2050, the Social Security system is going to be bankrupt because too many people are withdrawing from it and not enough people are putting into it. So they're saying there's not enough money basically in this account for it to continually be running. And so, to that end, a lot of policymakers advocate for different policy solutions to ensure that everyone has access to retirement accounts. Recently, during the State of the Union, Trump pitched kind of his policy idea. I'm not sure how full baked it was, but there is a savings vehicle that all federal government, civil service employees, and uniform service employees have access to, and that's called the Thrift Savings Plan. And so he basically suggested that all Americans should have access to this type of account to ensure that everyone has access to retirement savings. And so, just to put it into perspective, the average Social Security benefit is about $1,903 per month. So if you're on Social Security, that's how much on average you're getting per month, which, depending on where you live, may not be enough to live off of, which is why people often have a diverse portfolio of retirement savings accounts like 401ks, like IRAs, why they use their house as a type of retirement insurance. So, all that to say, Case, how do you feel about retirement? Do you feel like you are prepared? Is it a scary topic? Do you not like really think about it because it's kind of far off?
It's a scary topic, I would say. Well, as much as these days. But what was interesting for me was when I was taking a look at some of the higher level statistics when we talk about any kind of retirement savings plan, 60% of Americans have some form. So whether that be 401k, a pension, or what have you, 60% of Americans have some form, which leaves 40% having nothing. And essentially, it makes retirement in America basically optional, which is the problem. So when you talk about pain points and or things feeling scary, like that definitely feels relevant in this case. I also think that similar to health insurance, so much of this is tied to your employment, and the more high paying jobs that are out there provide match programs to your 401k and other incentives that help fuel these accounts. So the idea is that that is how you set yourself up for success. And growing up, I don't remember what TV show it was, but there was definitely, the waspy mindset of make sure whoever you marry has a good 401k or like has a 401k and working towards that, you know? And so I definitely recall those types of statements. But I think when it comes down to practice, it's unsurprising that 83% of high earners have some kind of retirement account, and much like everything else we're dealing with, it becomes a have and have not situation. It's like, what are people doing? We can't just continue to work until we're 85, 90 years old. Like, that's not possible,
Yeah.
real thing. So, how are we protecting our seniors? And
Mhm.
I think, okay, it feels really far off and you just wanted
Right.
to, but that's not the best way to handle things. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that's the interesting part of it too. Even if, let's just say, you believe that it's the public sector's responsibility to have a robust social security system, it's just not going to cut it. People need additional savings vehicles. Like, unfortunately, that's what it's going to be. And so what the government then has to do in parallel to ensuring that we have a strong social security system is provide reforms, incentives to make sure people are saving in other accounts. And so it's interesting to think a lot about the behavioral economics that go into automatic enrollment versus like when you have to manually opt in. That's something that has like changed over time. Also providing more like tax incentives for employers who do provide accounts so that they can have the match programs or better vesting options, because I just feel like I've been so screwed over because especially in today's day and age, people hop from jobs to jobs. And that's like one, a part of why pensions are not what they used to be and they're not offered as much because people don't stay in the same place forever. But also when you're hopping around, a lot of times employers, they have this vesting policy where you have to be there a certain amount of time before you actually can recoup the matches that they've put into your account. And every time I leave a job, I feel like, I'm just like flushing so much money down the toilet because I don't get to, get that match. So let me count how many different types of savings accounts I have. I have a 401k, I have a 401(b), I have a TSP, I have a IRA, and obviously I will get Social Security when I am of age. And that's because I've been in so many different jobs, which have, so many different types of retirement accounts. And so I reached out to a financial advisor because I was like, am I set up to retire? Like, what is my financial status? And we went over everything. And she ultimately was like, you're fine, but it's crazy because you have to think of things like what your lifestyle is going to be by the time you're that age. Are you going to be traveling? Blah, 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 blah. So it does feel like very far off, but it's so important to talk about because The earlier you do it, the better off you'll be because money compounds over time. And so the younger you start saving, the better position you'll be in later in life. But I also feel like we're going to be gypped out of the Social Security program. Like, I fear we're not even going to be able to reap those benefits, a system we've been paying into by the time we're of age because it's we're like essentially in a crisis.
Right. Well, I want to know from a policy perspective, like, what do you think is best? Because I have absolutely no expertise on this. Every job I've ever had, I've opted into a 401k and I've had a match program. And again, depending on how long you stay at the job, it's like certain increments and what have you.
To be clear,
Curious.
this is not financial advice.
No, I'm more curious, Mac, to know from a policy perspective, what do you think would be the best way to ensure A, like fairness across the board, no matter how much money you make, and B, I think fairness in terms of the fact that if Social Security runs out for us people who've been paying, like, what's good with that?
Yeah, that's a good question. And there are research centers and financial institutions that do a lot of research on ways to, like, strengthen retirement security. I do feel like one, it is an educational piece. I do not remember learning about this in school at all.
Right.
Like, no one ever taught us, like, this is how you put aside money, this is how much money, but it's so funny. I'm sure a lot of people have had this experience. You go on TikTok and you see people who are like, spend a day with me as a 26-year-old working at wherever, making like $5 billion, and they like budget with me. There's putting away 50% of their paycheck towards their savings, their retirement, all these different savings vehicles. And it's like, am I behind? And I think that's the biggest fear that I've always had around retirement is like feeling like I'm behind. And you hear all these numbers like, oh, you should have $1 million saved by the time you retire. And I'm like, $1 million, save $1 million. So I feel like the best thing that you can do is if you have access to it, working with someone who understands your budget and your income to say, okay, this is like the percentage. But I think as far as policy goes, one thing I feel like can be done is incentivizing and making it more beneficial for employers to increase their match programs to improve their vesting options and also the age limits because
Mhm.
we've seen over time age limits increase because you have to be a certain age to you can't just say, oh, I retire, I'm going to collect social security, right?
Right, right.
Like, you have to be a certain age, and that is like getting older and older and older. And so that's like kind of the main thing that people go to. They're like, oh, we'll just increase their retirement age to help
Offset.
yeah, to help keep
Yeah,
Social Security afloat. And I hope that's not going to be our saving grace and saving
right.
policy. But, I'm not sure, like I said, how baked out Trump's idea is. I think he just kind of threw it out there at the State of the Union.
He did. I wanted to
Um,
ask you about that too.
but
He's
I
trying
do
to get
agree
a
with him
win
on the
anywhere he
principle.
yeah, he's trying to get a win anywhere he can. And this was one where I was like, okay, my ears are perked up. And the reality of having Trump as our president is like, okay, he's still the president. So we can not be happy that he's the president, but doesn't negate the fact that ultimately we have to work with him and we have to try and like figure some stuff out and let's see if we can make some good happen in any of this. So if he's throwing out a policy that seems kind of interesting, then like let's hear him out. We know that affordability is still so top of mind for everyone. And like this
Yeah.
goes along with that too. How are we making things affordable and also sustainable in the long run? So when we think about those things and his ideas for the TSP, the fact that we have 40% of Americans that don't have anything, this would be a real
Right.
benefit.
Right. And it would be a benefit to have this dedicated vehicle for your retirement savings. We did a episode on the housing crisis and we made a TikTok about it and we talked about the tension between housing as a tool for building wealth versus a basic human right and it being affordable. And someone pointed out in the comments that a lot of people do use their house as a retirement vehicle. They bank on the fact that they will be able to cash out of their home and sell their home when they no longer need that space as retirement. But it's a risky one thing to do. And two, that puts pressure on the housing market, which is part of the problem when we talk about housing affordability. That's why I think the idea of having thrift savings plan, which is a public sector run savings program, is a good idea because it gives some of that burden and some of that responsibility back to the public sector. And it doesn't become, it doesn't like, because 401ks can get tricky with private sector, making sure everyone has access to this type of account and it's not dependent on an employer giving you access is a good idea.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think it's also really important when we talk about leveling the playing field, which we talk about all the time here. It's like, where are we setting people up for success, right? And I think that
Right.
let's go back to the pension conversation. Like, pensions are essentially obsolete nowadays. Very few companies that I know of are still giving pensions, but my parents both have them. And that was a main source of how people were getting retirement funds. And because we've shifted from the pension model to personal responsibility, that comes with, a larger community responsibility where it's like, okay, the market has changed and the demands are different. Like, it doesn't mean that the need goes away. So it feels like more so now than ever, the pressure for making money and also having a sustainable lifestyle is so on the individual. And that transition is part of the reason why I think we're in a bit of this mess. Like, sure, Social Security was always going to have its issues, and like we know that there's a possibility for it to run out, and that was like always going to be the case. But the fact that no one else has really stepped up to assume the responsibility to fill in these gaps is what I think we have to be talking about. Like, who decided that they're just not going to do pensions anymore?
Well, it got too expensive for employers. That's one of the main reasons. So they started this 401k program, and it also gave them a little bit more autonomy to choose their investments, which you can do with the 401k and not with the pension. But I think at the end of the day, what does it always come back to? The corporate greed.
Yes. That's my point, like, sure, yes, we know pensions are expensive, but at a certain point, like, there is a level of corporate responsibility that is always being shirked, in my opinion. So, okay, pensions are too expensive, 401k model, all right, but that's still not going to like satisfy the full need. And I just think that ultimately, you can increase the retirement age, and you know what else that's going to do? That's going to leave a lot of people in powerful positions that shouldn't be there. And also just
Yeah.
an aging workforce that's not as competent and able to keep up. Like, that's just the reality. As people get older, there's a retirement age for a reason because capabilities are different. And
Yeah.
I
And
think
it's like
that's
you want to
enjoy
go
your
ahead.
life. You want to enjoy your
Yeah,
life.
that's exactly. That's what I was literally about to interrupt you and say. It's like you want to enjoy your life. And I think culturally and society, there's this notion of like, you're basically, chained to a desk until you get to retirement and then you ride off into the sunset and just live your life the way you want to live it. And you're not,
Right.
catering to anybody. But with the retirement age getting older and older, I think people are like, so I have to wait till I'm 70 and probably limit my health situation is going to be different. My traveling abilities are going to be different at that age. And
Mhm.
so I think like that's unfortunate, but it's interesting because have you heard of like the FIRE people? It's an acronym and I'm actually blanking on what it stands for. So I'm going to like look it up as I talk, but they're basically the people who aggressively save money so that they can retire very early.
Okay.
Yeah.
Definitely heard of people doing that, for
What do you think
sure.
about that?
Go off. I love it. I mean, I think that one thing that makes everything so challenging about society right now is that everyone sees things as such a linear path and nothing needs to be linear. Like, we're in 2026, change is abundant and all around us, and there are a million ways to make money nowadays, and there are a million ways to get from point A to point B. So I do think that there is like more power to the people who are being creative and doing what they
Yeah,
want to do, because ultimately if you want to be chained to the man, that's your prerogative, but I don't. And especially when we have so many systems that are just failing us time and time again, you've got to figure out a way to move that needle by all means necessary.
I agree. The financial independence retire early. A movement. It's a movement of financial strategy focused on aggressively saving. So they basically often save between like 50 to 70% of their income so that they can retire before the traditional age of 65. And I think again, it's like, well, who's able to save that much of their income? Again, it goes like back to the disparities. Very high earners can do this. And it's also when you think about the disparities, it's kind of messed up because high earners also typically have access to more types of retirement accounts. There are certain retirement accounts and options where like if you make enough money, you can like defer, and it's different than like a 401k or these other savings vehicles, but you can like defer part of your salary to retirement.
Pre-tax.
Yes,
Hmm.
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This ties into the conversation also of like the CEOs that make 100 times
Right.
more than the
Right.
like entry level people. And it's like, that's the type of
Right.
BS that's got to go because there's no reason for that. And that's the reason why they cut pensions in the first place, right? They can't afford it. No, actually, when you have salaries that are so egregiously inflated, it's just not necessary. I don't understand why people don't feel bad about that either. But I mean, whatever.
It blows
But
my mind.
when you have so much of wealth concentrated at the top
Yeah.
and then it leaves just the scraps for everyone else, yeah, we're going to be in a retirement crisis. I'm no mathematician. Anybody could tell you I'm horrible at math, but I know that that math ain't mathin' for sure, or it's only mathin' for some.
Yeah.
Like, give me a break.
I agree. Yeah. But ultimately, at the end of the day, kind of going back to the Trump policy idea,
Yeah,
is, this is kind of it's adjacent to his Trump accounts, right?
yeah.
Him setting up this savings vehicle for people to address the fact that a lot of people don't have access to these types of financial accounts. And I think, like you said, it's getting at something that is a real problem,
Mhm.
but is it going to create more disparities in access? Like we talked about the Trump accounts, how it has the potential to actually just create bigger wealth gaps because the people who take advantage of it will
Mhm.
be further ahead. Will TSPs being publicly available to the general public be a good thing, or will it wind up creating more gaps? Is I
I
think the
think
question.
I think that when it comes down to it, there's always gonna be some level of disparity. Like, it's part of it is natural. Like,
Yeah,
there's part of it that can't be avoided. But I do think that the effort has to be there to make
right.
it to at least even get to a starting point. Like, we've got to start somewhere. And then when we actually have a social safety net in place that is more equitable, at least we can start addressing like what the concerns are after that point, right? Like it's
Yeah,
almost like at this point, we're in such a trial and error period because we don't know what's going to be perfect. It would be a new system. So we would have to analyze what happens, once it's in place. But I think the bigger keystone here is getting something in place, at least
yeah,
trying. And I thought of the Trump accounts as well because you do bring up a good point. The kids whose parents are able to invest more are obviously going to be set up way way better, but what I can say is, listen, I'm of the belief that like let's make the next generation better. Let's set
yeah.
them up better than we were set up. For us it was like how much your parents could afford to send you to college or you're taking out loans. that was the only way, unless you have some kind of familial wealth. Like, we didn't have these programs. So again, it's like, do we know how successful the Trump accounts are going to be? No, but we've got to start somewhere. So I have to give credit where it's
Yeah.
due on that one.
Yeah, it's an interesting idea, and it's better than raising the retirement age or just being like, well, if you don't get it, you don't get it. So, all in all, I would love to see where this idea goes in this administration if he is able to move on some type of retirement security policy by the end of his term. I think if he did, he would have to be given the credit for that. Otherwise, I feel like we're just waiting for Social Security to burn. And everyone's like, well, we'll just cross that bridge when we get there.
I don't trust Trump as far as I can throw him, but I also, Trump, if you're listening, we would like to see this go through. So, there is something to be said for trying a program and like
Yeah,
seeing what can happen. I have no faith in the Republicans because they don't care about anybody, but you know,
I'm dead.
I think the more we discuss it though, like again, going back to the idea that like knowledge is just power, the more that we talk about these things and the more that we can at least amplify this issue, it's going to go across more people's desks. And like that's kind of the
Yeah,
point right now. I think it's like, look, here's the facts. Retirement outlook is not great. This is what you can
yeah,
do to help yourself now, which is, you know, speak to your financial advisor and get your investments in line if you can, and or you know figure out the best way route for you. I mean, again, this is not financial advice by any means, but I think the
yeah,
the bigger thing is
yeah,
how are we amplifying this message that if you're feeling a little bit uncertain about retirement, you're not alone,
yeah,
and we
yeah,
do need better systems, and we can't rely on social security and the net that we have in place right now. So like,
yeah.
what are we doing to address this?
Yeah. And I will say in closing, every time we talk about a social program, it always reminds me of why we need guaranteed income. This is another argument, another exhibit, another kind of piece of evidence as to why a universal social safety net program like universal basic income, like guaranteed income, would be the best idea ever. So that's my 2 cents.
Agreed. Say less. We just want the people to have money to live.
Yeah,
We just want to enjoy our
yeah.
lives too.
Well, that is all we have for today on retirements. Like we said, we're not financial advisors, so please seek the counsel and advice of a lawyer or accountant for your specific case. But all things policy, we're happy to discuss and debate. If you have any thoughts, feedback, questions, comments, feel free to drop us a line in one of our socials. You can follow us and find us on Instagram, Substack, and YouTube.
Bye.